The year was 1867, and New Mexico's sun bore down like judgment itself. The ranch yard lay still except for the crowd that gathered, boots shifting in the dust, whispers rising as if the desert air carried gossip faster than the wind. At the center stood a woman, wrists bound to the upright post, her dark hair matted across her face. Her name was Elena, daughter of a Mexican mother and an Apache father, and for 5 years she had worked harder than any hand on the McAllister ranch. The whip cracked. It cut the air before it cut her skin. The crowd flinched even though it was not their backs being torn. A second crack followed, sharper, crueler. Her body arched, and the fabric of her blouse shredded under the raw power of leather. Blood welled against her skin, red against brown. She did not cry out. That silence, her silence, was worse than screams. Men muttered at the edges of the corral. Some shook their heads. Some spat in the dirt. Some looked away. A few, the crueler sort, leaned forward, eyes glinting like they were watching a show. The foreman, a square-jawed brute named Cooper, swung the lash with rhythm, his teeth clenched, sweat dripping down his temple. For theft, he barked, though his voice carried a hollow sound of false authority. From the edge of the crowd, the rancher himself stood, John McAllister, tall, broad-shouldered, with a weather-beaten face that usually carried a stern calm. But today, his jaw was tight, his eyes shadowed. He watched but did not move. He let it happen. Elena lifted her head, forcing her gaze through the sweat and blood into his. Her lips trembled, not with plea, but with disbelief. He had promised her once that she was safe under his roof. That promise was now ash. Another lash fell, and she felt not just the pain of the leather, but the tearing away of trust. Each strike spoke louder than any word McAllister could have uttered. His silence was a betrayal deeper than the wound across her back. When at last the foreman lowered his whip, panting, Elena's knees buckled. The ropes were untied, and she sank to the dirt, her breath shallow, her skin burning. A murmur ran through the crowd. Some pitied her, others scorned her. None dared intervene. McAllister turned away first. That cut her worse than the whip. Her cheek pressed into the dust, and she whispered a single name through cracked lips. Dakota, then another, Keem. Her brothers' names, carried on the dry air like a vow. The crowd began to scatter. Only the echo of leather remained. The desert carried news faster than horse or rider. By dusk, a trader's boy on a weary mule rode into the Sierra foothills, where Apache fires burned in secret valleys. His story spilled out with wide eyes. A woman whipped in the open, bloodied and broken while the rancher she served stood silent. Dakota rose before the tale was finished. Broad as an oak, his face painted with the lines of war, his black hair tied back with rawhide. He towered over the boy, who shrank under his glare. Beside him stood Keem, younger but no less fierce, his eyes sharp as obsidian, his chest bare, painted in streaks of red and black. "She begged us once not to strike him," Keem said, voice low, teeth clenched. Said the rancher gave her bread when others turned her away. Dakota's fist closed around the haft of his spear until his knuckles whitened. And now he lets her bleed. The brothers moved without another word. They stripped to their breechcloths, painted themselves in silence. They tied their hair, sharpened their knives. Dakota dragged a whetstone across the edge of his blade, slow and deliberate, each scrape a promise of blood. Keem strung his bow, his fingers quick, his jaw set. The fire crackled. The boy slipped away into the dark, fearful of the vengeance he had awakened. Under the moon, Dakota rose to his full height, his chest gleaming, his war paint glowing under firelight. He silenced her, he growled. "Now we will speak." Keem's lips curled into something colder than a smile. By morning, they will know her brothers walk again. They rode down the mountain like shadows, their ponies swift and silent, their bodies braced for blood. The night carried only the sound of hooves and the hiss of blades in the scabbard. Elena lay near a low fire, every breath a battle. She had bound her back with torn cloth, each movement tearing the wounds wider. The cabin walls seemed to close around her, the silence thicker than the desert night. She thought of her mother's lullabies, of running wild with her brothers in the riverbeds of her youth. She had chosen this rancher's roof, chosen to stay when her brothers warned her that men like him would never see her as more than a tool. Now she saw how right they were. The fire popped. She stirred, clutching her shawl tighter. Her mind drifted, but always it returned to the faces of Dakota and Keem, giants in her childhood, protectors, warriors who had sworn no white man's word could chain them. She both feared and longed for their return, because when they came, there would be no mercy. Outside, the desert wind shifted, carrying with it the faint echo of hooves, not the soft plod of a single horse, but the rolling thunder of two moving fast, relentless. She closed her eyes. She could almost hear her father's voice. Blood calls to blood. In town, men sat in the saloon, nursing their whiskey when a rider burst through the swinging doors, face pale under his hat. "They're coming," he rasped, breath ragged. "Two Apaches, big as mountains. I seen them on the ridge. They're heading straight for McAllister's." The room went silent, cards stilled in men's hands. The sheriff spat a cigar, his brow furrowed. A drunk muttered, "Reckon this town will burn." The ranch hands whispered by the bunkhouse fires. Even McAllister, sitting alone in his parlor with his glass of rye, felt the unease settle into his bones. He looked out into the night, but the desert showed nothing yet, only stillness. In Elena's small cabin, her body shook with strange fever, relief mixed with terror. She whispered their names again, softer this time. "Dakota, Keem." Her lips cracked as the words left her. The firelight flickered against her face as she slumped into the shadows, her eyes open but heavy with exhaustion. Far beyond the hills, two riders cut to the night, dark silhouettes against the moon. They did not slow. They did not speak. The desert knew vengeance was coming. The dawn broke red, as if the sun itself bled for what was coming. The McAllister ranch lay quiet, dew still clinging to the grass, the corrals heavy with the breath of horses. A lone rooster crowed, then silence again. The silence did not last. Out of the mesquite came two shadows on horseback, silent as the desert wind. Dakota and Keem, painted for war, eyes burning like coals. Their ponies moved with practiced grace, hooves muffled in the soft earth. They did not shout. They did not warn. They struck. An arrow whistled through the cool morning air. A ranch hand by the corral cried out and dropped where he stood, the hay fork clattering from his hand. Another arrow followed, faster than a heartbeat, and a second man spun backward into the dust. Panic erupted. Horses screamed, stamping against the railings. "Apaches!" One man roared, reaching for his rifle. He got no further. Keem charged through the gate, his pony leaping the fence as his war club swung down. The sound was sickening, bone meeting ironwood. The ranch hand crumpled like a sack of grain. Dakota circled wide, his spear flashing in the sun. He cut down the ropes of the corral, setting the horses free in a thunder of hooves. Dust rose in choking clouds, men shouting, scattering, half blind in the chaos. From the ranch house, John McAllister burst out onto the porch, rifle in hand, his nightshirt flapping at his knees. His face was pale with shock, but his jaw set hard. He had been warned. He knew this was no random raid. This was vengeance. Dakota saw him. The Apache giant raised a spear, pointed across the dust-filled yard, and locked eyes with the rancher. No word was spoken, yet the message was clear. "You are the one we have come for." Gunfire cracked, wild and panicked. Ranch hands shot into the dust, hitting nothing but fleeing horses. Dakota and Keem did not fire back. They didn't need to. Their attack was not slaughter but a warning, a promise of worse to come. As suddenly as they had appeared, they wheeled their ponies and vanished into the mesquite, leaving two men dead in the dirt and a ranch in chaos. The dust settled slow, like ash after fire. The silence that followed was heavier than the dawn had been. McAllister lowered his rifle with shaking hands. For the first time in years, fear crawled into his bones. Elena sat by her small window, her back bandaged with rags, each breath tugging against raw wounds. She had heard the shots, the screams, the horses. She knew without looking who had brought the chaos. "They've come," she whispered, though no one was there to hear. A knock rattled her door. She tensed, but it was McAllister's voice, low and hurried. "Elena, let me in." She hesitated, then rose slowly, every movement agony. She unlatched the door. McAllister stepped inside, his face drawn, his eyes shadowed. He smelled of gunpowder and sweat. "They'll kill me," he said, his voice rough. "You know they will." Her laugh was bitter, hollow. "And you think I will stop them?" He flinched, as though her words struck harder than any blow. He faltered. "Elena, I was wrong. I should have stopped it. But You chose silence," she cut in, her eyes hard. "While I bled, you turned your face away. Do you think my brothers will be merciful where you were not?" He took a step closer, desperation etched in his features. "You loved me once. If any of that remains, if there's anything left, speak to them. Tell them I am not their enemy." Her jaw clenched. Memories pressed against her heart. The nights they shared under the stars, his arms around her, his promises whispered in the dark. For a moment, her anger cracked and pain showed through. But then she shook her head. "I will not speak for you," she said, voice sharp. "They will come, and you will hear the sound of their answer." He staggered back, his breath unsteady. He saw then that her loyalty was broken, shattered beyond repair. Elena sank back into her chair, her hand pressed to her ribs. She did not want his death, not truly, but the choice was no longer hers. Blood called to blood, and her brothers had already answered. By midday, word had spread beyond the ranch. In the saloon, men gathered in tight clusters, voices low, whiskey glasses clinking nervously. "They cut down 2 of McAllister's men this morning." One ranch hand muttered, eyes darting to the doors as if expecting the Apaches to walk in. "They won't stop there," another replied, his voice trembling. "They'll come for all of us. You mark me." The sheriff leaned back in his chair, the brim of his hat low, his cigar forgotten between his fingers. His voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed unease. "2 men can't take a town. Don't let fear turn you into fools." But the men weren't convinced. They had heard the stories. 2 brothers, giants among their people, fighters who never lost a battle. Legends whispered them cutting through patrols twice their number. If those stories were true, 2 men were enough. Across the room, a traveling preacher lifted his Bible with shaking hands. "This is the Lord's punishment," he cried. "Blood for blood, sin for sin." He was shouted down, but the words lingered, heavy in the smoke-filled air. At the ranch, the men dug in, boarding windows, loading rifles, whispering prayers. McAllister moved among them, issuing orders, but doubt clung to his voice. Every creak of wood, every rustle of leaves made them jump. They knew Dakota and Keem were close, watching, waiting. Elena sat in her cabin, staring at the horizon through her window. She could feel her brother's presence like a storm building in the distance. Part of her prayed they would show mercy. Another part knew mercy was not in their nature. As the sun dipped low, painting the desert gold, 2 figures appeared on the ridge above the ranch. Dakota and Keem sat their ponies, tall and motionless, their silhouettes stark against the dying light. Dakota raised his hand. Slowly, deliberately, he pointed toward the ranch house. Then he lowered his arm, and both brothers turned their horses away, disappearing into the scrub as silently as they had come. The message was clear. Elena's breath caught in her chest. She pressed her hand to the window frame, her body trembling. She did not know if the gesture filled her with dread or relief. Inside the house, McAllister stood frozen, staring at the ridge long after the brothers had vanished. He knew then that his time was borrowed, his days measured not by the sun but by the will of 2 Apache giants who carried vengeance in their blood. The night came heavy, filled with whispers and fear, and all who saw the ridge that evening knew the storm was only beginning. The night air was heavy, still as a coffin, the stars sharp against the black sky. Inside the ranch house, every lamp burned, the light trembling against boarded windows. McAllister sat at the head of the table, rifle across his knees, eyes hollow with waiting. Around him, a handful of ranch hands drank their courage from whiskey bottles, the smell of fear thicker than the smoke from their cigars. Outside, the desert held its breath. Then came the sound. Hooves. Slow, steady, deliberate. Two riders approaching. Not a gang, not a raid, just two. But those two were enough to make every man inside stiffen, rifles rising, hearts pounding. Elena stood near the window of her cabin, her bandages damp with blood, her shawl clutched close. She knew the sound of those hooves. She had ridden with them as a girl, chasing jackrabbits through riverbeds, hearing her brother's laughter echo in the canyons. Now, that same rhythm carried vengeance. The brothers rode into the yard. Dakota dismounted first, towering in the lamplight, his face painted in black streaks, his chest bare but for the necklace of claws that rattled as he moved. Keem followed, bow in hand, the string taut, his gaze cold as stone. A shout rang from the house. "They're here!" The first shot cracked the silence, glass exploding from a window. The brothers didn't flinch. Dakota strode forward, spear in one hand, his other arm raised in challenge. Keem loosed an arrow in answer. A scream tore from inside as a ranch hand staggered back, the shaft buried in his chest. The yard erupted. Bullets tore through the dark, sparks leaping from the wood beams. Elena's heart thundered. She pressed her hands to the window frame, torn between terror and longing. Her brothers were death itself, but they were also her blood. McAllister kicked the door open, stepping into the yard with his rifle raised. His nightshirt was gone, replaced by his long coat, his boots planted hard in the dust. His face was grim, lined with defiance. "Dakota!" he shouted, his voice echoing. "Keem, this is my land, my fight. Come for me, then leave the rest." Dakota's eyes burned like fire. He lowered his spear to the ground, drove it into the earth a thud, and drew the knife from his belt. His voice, deep as thunder, carried across the yard. "You watched while our sister bled. Now you will answer." The two men closed the distance. Bullets whined around them, but Keem's arrows cut down every hand who dared step forward. McAllister fired once, twice. One shot grazed Dakota's shoulder. The other split Keem's bowstring. The Apaches didn't falter. Dakota reached him first. The knife slashed, and McAllister's rifle spun into the dust. They grappled, fists slamming, bodies colliding in the dirt. McAllister fought like a man cornered, raw and desperate. His fists cracked against Dakota's jaw. His knee drove into the giant's ribs. Dakota roared and hurled him backward, the knife flashing in the lamplight. McAllister rolled, grabbed a loose plank, swung it hard across Dakota's temple. Blood sprayed. Dakota staggered but did not fall. Keem advanced, another knife in hand, but a cry broke through the chaos. "Stop." Elena's voice cut the night sharper than any blade. She staggered into the yard, her body trembling, her face pale under the lamplight. Her shawl slipped from her shoulders, revealing the raw lashes on her back. The sight stilled every man. Even Dakota froze, chest heaving, blood running down his cheek. She stood between them, her eyes burning with fury and sorrow. "If you kill him, you kill me too." McAllister blinked, sweat and blood dripping into his eyes. "Elena!" he rasped. She raised her hand, silencing him. "I begged for your mercy once, brother. I asked you to let me live under this roof. You gave me that gift. Now I beg for his life." Dakota's jaw clenched, his chest rising and falling like a storm contained. Keem's gaze flicked between them, the knife twitching in his grip. "He let them strike you," Dakota growled. "He turned his face while you bled." "And I will never forget it," Elena answered, her voice breaking. "But I loved him once. Perhaps I still do. Do not take from me the last piece of my heart." The silence that followed was heavier than gun smoke. McAllister dropped to his knees in the dust, chest heaving. He looked up at the brothers, his voice raw. "I was a coward. I let fear chain my hands. If you take my life, I won't resist. But I beg you, give me a chance to make it right." Dakota's nostrils flared. His knife hovered inches from McAllister's throat. The entire ranch seemed to wait for his hand to fall. But Elena's trembling form stood between them, her eyes wet with tears. Finally, Dakota stepped back, his knife dripping with his own blood instead of McAllister's. He turned away, his broad shoulders shaking with fury barely restrained. Keem spat into the dirt. His voice was flat, Final. We leave you alive, not for your sake, rancher, but for hers. Fail her again, and no words will stop us. They mounted their ponies, silent as shadows, and rode back into the desert without looking back. Elena's legs gave way. McAllister caught her before she fell, cradling her against him as the lamps flickered in the wind. The yard was littered with blood and silence. The storm had passed, but the warning remained. The dawn crept slow over the desert, painting the sky in shades of fire and ash. The ranch yard was quiet now, the dead carried off, the surviving hands gone pale and wordless. Only McAllister and Elena remained by the porch, her body wrapped in fresh linen, his hands stained from binding her wounds. He sat beside her, shoulders bowed, his eyes hollow. For the first time since he had come west, John McAllister looked less a rancher and more a man, broken, remorseful, searching for a truth he had ignored too long. Elena's gaze drifted across the horizon, to the ridges where her brothers had vanished. Her voice was hoarse but steady. They spared you because of me, not because you earned it. I know, he said quietly, and I'll carry that weight until I'm in the ground. She studied him, searching for the man she had once believed in. Why didn't you stop them, John? Why did you let them whip me? His throat worked as he forced the words. Because I was afraid. Afraid of losing the men. Afraid of standing alone. I thought silence would protect me, but it made me less than a man. She closed her eyes, her lashes wet. Your silence cut deeper than the whip. He bowed his head, shame etched in every line of his face. Then let me spend whatever days I have left proving I am not that man anymore. The wind rustled through the mesquite, carrying with it the faintest echo of hooves long gone. Elena felt the weight of two worlds pressing on her, her Apache blood, fierce and unyielding, and the fragile hope she had once placed in this rancher. Perhaps mercy had bought them a chance. Perhaps not. The desert would decide. As the sun climbed higher, burning away the last shadows of night, Elena leaned back against the porch post, her body weak but her spirit unbroken. McAllister sat beside her, silent, his eyes fixed on the horizon as if waiting for judgment to return. The story that night would spread. Of two Apache giants who came for vengeance, of a woman who stood between hate and love, of a rancher spared not by his courage but by the mercy of those he had wronged. And those who heard it would whisper the lesson beneath their breath. The frontier tested more than courage. It tested the cost of silence.